Some stories hide in the dust of old records. Some stay buried because the truth is too ugly. But every once in a while, a single detail in a crumbling ledger forces history to open its eyes again. This one began with a child whose hair looked like snow and whose knowledge was worth killing for. Part 1. Charleston Court records from 1798 list the arrival of a child described only as female, 8 years old, hair white as lamb's wool, purchased from Barbados estate sale. The entry seems simple, cold, and routine, one more line in a book filled with human lives reduced to merchandise. But what makes this record remarkable is not albinism. Albino children existed, though they were rarely written down. What makes it remarkable is what happened over the next 36 years and the strange violence that followed the woman Charleston society would later call Cotton. Her real name was lost the moment the Barbados plantation collapsed. The estate that owned her kept careful lists of every barrel of molasses and every pound of sugar but wrote almost nothing about the people who lived and worked there. When a hurricane in 1798 destroyed most of the sugar crop and left the plantation in ruins, everything of value was shipped away. 93 enslaved people were sent to American ports to cover debts. The child with the white hair was one of them. She arrived in Charleston looking like a strange miracle. Her hair was not yellow-white and not the gray of age. It was pure white, the color of winter snow against her dark brown skin. Her eyes were normal. Her skin showed no sensitivity. Just the hair, impossible to hide and impossible to forget. The auctioneer was a man named Thomas Waverly. He had sold thousands of people in his life and understood how to increase a price with a single phrase or gesture. When he saw the child's hair, he understood immediately that memorable meant valuable. He invented a background for her within seconds. He told buyers she came from a line of rare house servants known for their pure white hair, suggesting that she carried some unusual and useful bloodline. The story was a lie, but lies were common at slave auctions, and people believed what they wanted to believe. A rice planter named Harrison Caldwell paid $160 for her, a high price for a child. He named her Cotton, both for the hair and for the cruel humor of it. He brought her to his household in Beaufort where she worked in the kitchen. For 8 years her life was quiet. She grew from child to young woman. Her hair stayed white, always startling to look at. People stared. That was all. Everything changed in 1806 when Mrs. Caldwell's sister came to visit. Her name was Margaret Sutherland and she came from Savannah. Margaret was unlike most Southern women. She had ambition, sharp eyes and a talent for seeing value where others did not. She noticed Cotton watching, learning and never forgetting. Margaret offered Harrison $600 for Cotton. Harrison refused at first, but Margaret explained her plan at dinner while Cotton served wine. A girl who stood out so instantly could be used to impress guests, to elevate a household, to build reputation. Memorability was a kind of currency in Savannah society. Harrison decided that $600 was too much profit to ignore. He sold Cotton to Margaret. Cotton arrived in Savannah that spring and entered a different world. Margaret's home was smaller but far more social. Only 14 enslaved people worked there, but the house was constantly filled with guests. Margaret treated her home like a theater stage and expected every person within it to perform. Cotton became the first person visitors saw. Margaret polished her appearance, taught her posture and trained her to greet guests with calm and confidence. People stared as they always had, but now Margaret encouraged it. Stories began to circle about the woman with hair like bleached silk who stood at the Sutherland doorway like a living decoration. Cotton learned quickly. She memorized names and faces. She learned how to speak when spoken to, how to listen without appearing to listen, and how to move quietly but with purpose. She learned even faster because she knew that a mistake could mean being sold again. If that happened, she might never escape a life far worse than this one. One afternoon Margaret's nephew arrived from England. His name was James Sutherland. He was 24, educated and fascinated by plants and soils and everything related to agriculture. He noticed something others had missed. Cotton knew plants. He saw her examining indigo leaves in the garden, touching them with familiarity. When he asked if she understood indigo, she hesitated. Speaking directly to white men was dangerous. But she answered carefully. She told him she had watched indigo workers in Barbados. She explained that Georgia's soil was too wet, the climate too humid and the drainage improper. She spoke with the calm confidence of someone who remembered every detail of her childhood fields. James was stunned. Cotton possessed technical knowledge that many planters had forgotten or had never bothered to learn. Indigo had once been valuable in South Carolina, but production had declined as cotton became king. But in Europe, high-quality indigo dye still sold for excellent prices. Revival of the crop could make a fortune. James asked Cotton questions daily. Her answers were detailed and practical. She knew the timing for planting, the spacing, the soil treatment and the steps for extracting dye. This knowledge could change everything. James proposed an experiment. He owned 50 acres near the Ogeechee River and wanted to attempt an indigo crop. Margaret saw opportunity immediately. She agreed to a partnership. Cotton would be leased to James for the planting season in exchange for $200 plus a share of future profits. The agreement was written in letters and signed by both. The crop was planted in April 1809. Cotton supervised the work though James gave the orders. Her instructions turned the field into a model of efficient cultivation. Workers followed her guidance even though most had never taken orders from a woman, especially an enslaved one. By July the indigo plants were thriving. Word began to spread. People whispered about the strange white-haired woman who knew indigo secrets that others had forgotten. Then trouble began. A planter named Vincent Merrow visited the fields. He had tried for years to revive indigo in South Carolina without success. He examined the crop and made an astonishing offer. He offered James $2,000 to buy cotton outright. $2,000 for one enslaved woman was unheard of. James refused, but the offer spread quickly among planters and merchants. Soon after, a physician named Dr. Nathaniel Cross visited Margaret. He had heard of Cotton's unusual hair and wanted to examine her for medical research. He offered Margaret $300 for a few hours of access. Margaret declined. Something about the timing felt wrong. Then James received an anonymous letter. It claimed Cotton's indigo knowledge had been stolen from its rightful owners in Barbados and must be returned. The letter threatened legal consequences. The message was short but chilling. Someone was watching her. Someone wanted her knowledge. Someone believed she was worth fighting for. Cotton's life was no longer quiet. The storm around her had begun. Here is part 2 rewritten in an interesting way, horror style and historically grounded. Engaging hook. Some people vanish into the woods and are never seen again. Cotton was not one of them. When she disappeared that afternoon, every man on that plantation thought she was running for freedom. But Cotton was not running. She was planning, calculating, and preparing for something far more frightening than escape. What returned 4 days later was a woman who understood the value of fear, silence, and secrets. And she was ready to use all three. Part 2. The woman WHO would not be owned. The woods behind James Sutherland's property were quiet the night Cotton vanished. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign she had passed through. Vincent Merrow spent hours riding through the property screaming orders, swearing someone had helped her escape. The magistrate tried to stay calm, but even he looked shaken. Nobody wanted to admit the truth. Cotton had slipped away as easily as a shadow. Except she had not gone far. While Merrow's riders searched the marshes and the riverbank, Cotton was lying on the floor of an abandoned tobacco shed less than a quarter-mile away. The shed had not been used in years. Dust covered everything. Holes in the roof let in thin lines of light that crept across the floor like silver fingers. She stayed silent, breathing slowly, hearing shouts, horses, men, arguments. On the second night she listened to wolves howling in the distance. On the third night she heard the crackle of a torch as someone walked past the shed, so close she could see their shadow through the wall. Every night the field worker Patience brought her food and water, slipping into the shed at dawn, her hands shaking, whispering that the plantation was in chaos. Patience told her that Merrow had accused James of hiding her. That Margaret had shouted at the magistrate so fiercely he nearly left the property. That the workers were terrified but secretly proud of what they had done. Cotton listened to everything but said little. She was thinking. She was always thinking. She understood that she could not hide forever. She understood that running would end with dogs, chains, and punishment. But staying also meant being passed back and forth like an object, forced to serve whichever man forged the most convincing piece of paper. Except something had changed. Cotton realized for the first time that she had something none of them could take from her. Not with force, not with money, not with the law, her mind, her knowledge, her ability to make or break a fortune with a single decision. That was her power, that was her leverage, and she intended to use it. On the morning of the 5th day she stepped out of the shed, brushed the dust from her white hair, and walked calmly toward the main house as if she had simply taken an early morning walk. The guards stared at her, stunned. They did not raise their guns. Word traveled fast. By the time she reached the porch, James and Margaret were already waiting. James looked exhausted and desperate. Margaret looked angry enough to set the whole property on fire. Cotton did not bow. She did not lower her eyes. She stood with the same stillness she had held in the auction yard years ago, when the world decided who she would become. "I need to speak with both of you," she said. They brought her into the parlor. It was a room filled with books and velvet chairs and polished wooden floors, but the tension inside it was sharp enough to cut through anything. Margaret paced. James kept glancing out the window, expecting Marrow to appear with armed men. Cotton sat in a high-backed chair with perfect calm. "Everyone wants me for the same reason," she said. "My knowledge of indigo." They didn't respond. They didn't have to. She continued. "Marrow wants it for himself. You want it for profit. Margaret wants it because she invested in the experiment. And others will want it once they hear what happened with this harvest." Margaret stopped pacing. "You understand the situation better than I expected." "I have understood the situation since I arrived in this country," Cotton said. James cleared his throat. "If Marrow wins in court he will take you. We cannot stop him without evidence." Cotton nodded. "That is why I am offering something none of you expected." Both of them leaned forward. "I will teach 3 people everything I know about indigo. Every technique, every process, every mistake to avoid, everything I saw in Barbados and everything we learned here." James looked startled. "You would agree to that?" "Yes," Cotton said, "but only if I choose the 3 people." Margaret frowned. "You would not choose us." Cotton looked at her with calm eyes. "Knowledge has power only when the right people hold it. And if the wrong people hold it, it becomes dangerous." The room fell silent. James finally asked, "Who would you choose?" Cotton folded her hands. 3 field workers. Patience, Henry, and Samuel. Margaret exploded. 3 enslaved workers. Not us. Not family. Not owners. Why would you do that? Cotton spoke softly, but her voice carried the weight of something ancient. Because they are loyal. Because they have no desire to steal from each other. Because they understand the land. And because they saved me. James lowered his eyes. Margaret clenched her jaw. Cotton continued. "If they know everything I know, then my knowledge cannot be stolen by one man. It will belong to 3 people, which means no one can control it, no matter who claims legal ownership of me." It was brilliant. It was bold. It was dangerous. Margaret whispered, "You want to make yourself impossible to own." Cotton answered, "I already am." Before James or Margaret could respond, a loud knock echoed from the front door. Heavy, forceful, familiar. Vincent Marrow had returned, and this time he did not come alone. Engaging hook for part 3. Some secrets fade with time, but not the kind tied to blood, profit, and the hunger of men who cannot forget what they failed to own. Cotton believed she had finally escaped her past. For 24 years she lived quietly, her name forgotten, her value replaced by routine work and silence. But monsters do not stay buried. Sometimes they return wearing the face of an old man with a notebook and a smile that feels colder than winter. And when Dr. Nathaniel Cross found her again, the past did not just rise. It came for her with purpose. Part 3. The Dr. Who remembered. Cotton steadied the basket she was carrying when Dr. Nathaniel Cross spoke her name as if he had been holding it on his tongue for decades. The boarding house garden was quiet, the late afternoon sun warm and soft. Guests were upstairs resting. The street was calm, but the moment he said he remembered Savannah, 1809, the air itself felt different, heavier, as if someone had closed a door behind her. Cotton kept her voice steady. "You should forget that time. Nothing from those days matters now. Cross smiled in a way that made her wish she had stayed hidden inside. On the contrary, those events were unusual, very unusual. They deserve study. She turned away, pretending to check the herbs along the fence, trying to end the conversation. But Cross followed her slowly, hands behind his back, eyes locked on her hair. He lowered his voice as if the roses and soil might repeat his words. You were more than a house servant. You were at the center of a remarkable agricultural discovery. And there was conflict. There was violence. Men were desperate to control what you knew. Cotton gripped the edge of the garden bed. The wooden frame felt rough beneath her fingers. That was long ago, and I do not want trouble. Cross nodded thoughtfully. That is exactly why I am curious. You survived something most people never could. You carried rare knowledge that changed the profits of entire plantations. You disappeared for years, yet here you are. Still healthy, still strong, still with the same striking appearance. Cotton felt her pulse quicken. She kept her voice low. Please leave the past alone. But Cross did not want to leave it. He wanted to dig it up. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. I know you refused examination once. I know Margaret Sutherland protected you. I know you escaped a forced transfer. I also know the indigo knowledge you had suddenly spread to others, which means you shared it. That was a calculated move. Cotton stiffened. You do not know what you are talking about. Cross looked delighted, not offended. Oh, I know more than you think. I know forgery was involved. I know someone tried to claim ownership. And I know you vanished for 4 days. Witnesses mentioned it. I have notes from that period. I was in Charleston. I read every report. Cotton's heart thudded once, loud enough she could feel it in her ears. You should not ask questions about that. Cross tilted his head slightly. I am a man of science. Questions are what I live for. And you, my dear, are one of the most interesting questions I ever encountered. He walked away calmly, as if their conversation were polite small talk. But Cotton knew better. His interest was not harmless. It was hungry, and men like Cross never stopped once something fascinated them. That evening Cotton lay awake in her small room behind the kitchen. Footsteps creaked upstairs as guests settled. The sea wind brushed through the shutters. But she felt no peace. Cross had recognized her. Not only that, he had been waiting for a chance like this. He wanted to study her, write about her, expose her, and then every curious mind from Charleston to Savannah would come looking. Everything she had spent 14 years building could crumble. The next morning she tried to ignore him. She kept to the baking room. She cleaned the guest linens. She stayed inside whenever possible. But Cross always seemed to appear. Quiet footsteps behind her. Soft questions when she passed. Did you ever return to the indigo fields? How did you keep your knowledge so controlled? Have you ever been ill? Is your hair natural or caused by trauma? He never asked permission. He simply observed her like she was a rare specimen he finally had time to study. Martha Keene noticed. Is he bothering you? She asked one night while Cotton tended the fire. Cotton kept her answer calm. He remembers me from long ago. Too well. Martha shook her head. He will be gone in a week. Ignore him. But Cotton knew that was wishful thinking. Cross had already extended his stay once. And he had begun asking questions outside the boarding house. She overheard 2 merchants whispering that Cross had visited the local library and requested shipping logs and Charleston property records dating back 20 years. He was looking for her past. 3 nights later Cotton checked the guest parlor as part of her nightly duties. The candles were burning low. Guests were reading or writing letters. But Cross sat alone at a table near the window with a leather-bound journal open before him. Dozens of papers filled with tightly written notes were scattered around. He looked up when she entered. You cannot hide what you are, he said quietly. Cotton froze where she stood. Cross tapped his notebook with one finger. Did you know your hair has not changed in 20 years? The medical term is pileasis, but your case is far more severe and stable than any I have ever seen. Most individuals show gradual changes. Fading, shifting, but you remain constant. That suggests something unusual in your physiology. Cotton felt cold. You are mistaken. No, Cross whispered, I am correct. And I think you know it. For the first time Cotton saw something else in his eyes. Not just curiosity, fear, awe, possibility, the kind of expression men wore when they discovered something they believed could make them famous. That night Cotton did not sleep at all. She sat by her small window and listened to the waves hitting the harbor wall. By morning she had made a decision. If Cross kept digging, he would uncover names, events, and documents she hoped had been buried forever. He would bring attention. Attention brought danger, and danger brought interest from people far worse than Cross. Cotton needed to stop him before he uncovered her full history. The next day she approached him directly in the hallway. Guests moved around them, but Cotton kept her voice steady. "Leave me alone. Forget what you remember. You do not want to understand my past." Cross smiled slowly. "But that is exactly what I want." He leaned closer. "And I think the truth might be far more extraordinary than anything in my notes." Cotton stepped back, because when Cross looked at her that morning, his eyes were not those of a scientist. They were the eyes of a man who believed he had found something unnatural. Something that should not exist. And Cotton finally understood. Dr. Nathaniel Cross was not studying her for science. He was studying her because he believed she was not entirely human. Part 4. The shadow that returned for her. Engaging hook. People believed Cotton had escaped her past. People believed the danger had faded. But evil has patience. And sometimes the past follows you quietly, waiting for the moment you are alone. Dr. Nathaniel Cross stood in the boarding house garden, his eyes fixed on Cotton the way a man watches a rare animal in the wild. Cotton felt the old fear rising inside her, the fear she had not felt since Savannah, the fear she thought she had buried under years of quiet work and quiet living. She kept her voice even as she answered. "How long have you been following me?" Cross smiled softly. "Not constantly, just enough to notice patterns. I knew you were alive. Women with your condition do not simply disappear. I suspected you were somewhere in the Carolinas or Georgia. And then I saw you here." Cotton felt a cold weight settle inside her chest. She had spent 24 years lowering her value, lowering her importance, lowering her visibility. But this man had remembered her. He had held on to her memory like a thread, and now he was pulling that thread again. Cotton straightened. "Dr. Cross, I am not a medical curiosity. I am not an experiment." Cross looked at her with a strange mixture of pity and hunger. "You misunderstand. Your hair color is not the only unusual thing. You do not age the way others do. I saw you when you were 15. And now you are nearly 40. Yet you look almost the same. White hair, pale skin, little sign of time." Cotton froze. She had always known her appearance aged slowly, but most people simply assumed she was a woman who had gone gray early. Cross, however, had a 24-year-old memory to compare her against. Cross lowered his voice. "Science has no explanation for what you are. But I intend to find one." Cotton stepped back. She knew what that meant. She had heard stories. People like Cross believed that the human body was simply a puzzle they had the right to open. But Cotton also knew something else. These were the same kinds of men who had once tried to cut open Africans to find out why their skin was dark. Curiosity mixed with cruelty made a terrible combination. Cotton walked away without another word. But Cross knew exactly where she lived and worked now. She felt exposed again for the first time in decades. Martha Keene noticed Cotton's tension that evening. Something wrong. Cotton hesitated. She trusted Martha more than most, but trust did not mean safety. Still, she told her what Cross had said. Martha frowned. "That man is trouble. I can tell by the way he watches people. He thinks they are objects." Cotton nodded. "If he publishes anything about me, it will attract others. And not all of them will stop at observation." Martha tapped the table softly. "He cannot force anything without my permission. You are my property under the law." Cotton felt the familiar twist of pain at that word. But she also understood that, in this moment, that legal status was the only thing standing between her and something far worse. The next morning, Cross attempted again. "Cotton," he said calmly. "You need not be afraid. Science is not your enemy." Cotton's voice was steady. "I know what happens to people studied by men like you. My body is not your laboratory." Cross's expression changed. The smile faded. His eyes hardened. You misunderstand your situation. You are remarkable. Remarkable things are studied. That is how history works. Cotton moved closer, her voice quiet but strong. And you misunderstand your situation. I survived indigo plantations. I survived men like Vincent Marrow. I survived being sold 5 times. You think your curiosity frightens me. It does not. Cross stared at her for a long time, studying her the same way another man might study a map. Cotton did not blink. That night something strange happened. Cotton awoke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. Slow, careful, she knew the steps of everyone in the house. These did not belong to any of them. She sat up, listening. The door handle moved, turning just slightly. Cotton held her breath. The door did not open. Instead the footsteps continued down the hallway, descending the stairs. She waited several minutes before she rose and checked the hall. Empty. The next morning, Martha approached her with a pale face. My ledger is missing. Cotton tensed. The ledger listed every servant's age, origin, sale price, and restrictions. If Cross stole it, he now had access to all the written limitations Cotton had crafted for herself back in 1809. Those restrictions protected her, but they also identified her. Martha swallowed. I believe Dr. Cross entered my office last night. Nothing else is gone, only the ledger. Cotton felt her stomach drop. Cross now knew her full history. The indigo operation, the court case, the restrictions, everything. Cotton had worked for years to erase her past. Now Cross held it all in his hands. Martha said slowly, he is planning something. Cotton already knew. Cross would present her as a medical mystery. A woman who aged slowly. A woman with unusual physiology. A woman with 11 years of plantation labor but no signs of malnutrition. A woman with hair white since childhood. He would attract more doctors, scientists, collectors of human anomalies. And they would not all be as polite as he pretended to be. That evening Cotton found Cross sitting in the courtyard, writing in his journal. Return my ledger, she said. Cross looked up calmly. It is not your ledger. Cotton stepped forward. Return it. He closed his journal. You do not understand what you represent. Your body holds secrets that could change medical science. I cannot ignore that. And I cannot let you hide from the world forever. Cotton felt something inside her shift. For 24 years she had avoided conflict. Now conflict had returned to her doorstep. Cross leaned back. I will publish my findings soon. When I do, doctors across the country will come to see you. Cotton spoke quietly. Dr. Cross, if you do this, you will not be helping science. You will be disturbing something you do not understand. Cross laughed lightly. There is nothing supernatural about you. Cotton looked at him, her eyes steady. Then why have I aged so slowly? Why did my hair turn white at 15 and never change? Why did I survive things that killed others? Cross's smile faltered. Because your body is unusual. Cotton whispered. Or because something else has been at work in my life all these years. Something I did not ask for. Something you cannot examine with tools. Cross frowned slightly. Cotton added, if you keep digging into my past, you may find more than you expect. For the first time, Cross hesitated. Not because he believed her, but because something in her tone carried weight. Cotton stepped back. Return the ledger. Leave Charleston. Forget me. Cross shook his head. I cannot. Cotton nodded once. Then you have chosen the path. And I will choose mine. The next day Cross vanished from the boarding house. He left behind his journal. And Martha, frightened, brought it to Cotton. Inside were pages of observations. Drawings of her face. Notes about her hair. Charts about aging. And on the last page, something that made Cotton's blood go cold. One sentence written in hurried, uneven handwriting. I believe she is connected to the events of 1809. Something unnatural protected her then. Something still protects her now. I must find the source. Cotton stared at the words and felt a terrible truth rising. Cross was not giving up. He was going to dig deeper. And whatever he found, would not stay buried. If you want, I can continue with part 5 in the same style. Part 5. The man who would not leave her alone. Engaging hook. Some dangers attack loudly, others wait in silence. Cotton had faced cruel men before, but none frightened her like the man who believed he had a right to her secrets. Dr. Nathaniel Cross vanished from the boarding house without a word, but Cotton knew he had not gone far. Men like Cross never left until they got what they wanted. And what he wanted was her. 3 days passed. Guests came and went. Martha Keene watched the door every evening, expecting Cross to reappear. Cotton worked quietly, but her mind stayed sharp, listening for footsteps that did not belong, watching shadows that stretched too long across the hallway floor. One night, Martha found Cotton sitting awake at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. "You are afraid he will return," Martha said softly. Cotton answered without looking up. "He will return, not because he needs me. Because he needs to prove he can own my story." Cotton kept her voice calm, but inside she felt something deeper. A pressure. A sense that her past, the one she fought so hard to bury, was rising again like roots pushing through old soil. By the 4th day, Martha grew nervous enough to visit the local sheriff. She explained that a man had trespassed, stolen her ledger, and vanished. The sheriff listened politely but said he needed more evidence. Men like Cross, educated white physicians, were not treated as criminals without clear proof. Martha returned home frustrated. Cotton noticed her trembling hands and spoke gently. "I am sorry." Martha shook her head. "It is not your fault. That man is not sane. He looked at you like he wanted to take you apart." Cotton felt a chill travel down her spine. Those were the same words a field worker had once whispered to her 15 years ago about Vincent Marrow. Men obsessed with control had a look in their eyes, the same look Cross now carried. That evening, Cotton went to her small attic room and opened the journal Cross had left behind. She had avoided reading more than the final sentence, but now she forced herself to look at the earlier pages. He had documented her life in terrifying detail. Height, weight, skin texture, hair samples collected when she swept. Observations about how she moved, how she lifted objects, how she blinked less than most people. Notes about her slow aging. Questions about whether her metabolism was different. Lines describing the court case in Savannah. Comments on the white hair she had since childhood. But the most disturbing part was the final paragraph. She shows signs of unnatural preservation. This is not genetic. This is not environmental. There is a pattern here. Something protected her in 1809. Something still shields her now. I will uncover it, even if she resists. Cotton closed the journal and felt something inside her shift. She had survived cruelty she could see. Whips, fields, owners, the endless grind of plantation life. But this was different. Cross did not want to break her body. He wanted to study her soul. She whispered into the empty room. "You cannot have me." The next morning, something strange happened. A letter arrived addressed to Martha Keene. Martha read it once, then went pale and handed it to Cotton. Cotton unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant and sharp. "Mrs. Keene, I regret leaving without notice. I have been gathering additional historical materials concerning your servant. I will return shortly to complete my research. I expect your cooperation. This work is of national importance. Dr. Nathaniel Cross." Cotton's hands tightened around the paper. He wrote as if she were not a person at all. As if she were a specimen in a box waiting to be opened. Martha exhaled slowly. "He means to force this." Cotton nodded. "He will not stop until he gets what he wants." That night a storm rolled over Charleston. Thick clouds swallowed the moon. The boarding house shook with wind. The shutters clattered like restless hands. Cotton sat awake again, listening. At midnight she heard footsteps on the porch. No knock, no voice, just a quiet presence standing outside. She rose and looked out the window. A figure stood by the gate. A tall man in a dark coat, staring at the house as if trying to see inside with his mind. Lightning flashed. She saw his face clearly. Cross. He stood unmoving, his eyes fixed on her window. Cotton stepped back. Her breath came shallow. Something old inside her stirred, something she had kept buried since childhood, something connected to the name her mother whispered before dying. "Cotton, do not let them touch your hair. Do not let them cut it. It belongs to the old ones. It belongs to the spirits." Cotton had never known what that meant. She was born on a plantation. She knew nothing of the old world her mother came from. But now, looking at Cross's hungry eyes, She felt the same warning rising again. At dawn, Cross was gone. But footprints remained in the wet soil leading to the porch. Cotton followed them with her eyes. They stopped just beneath her window. Martha confronted her that morning. Cotton, you cannot stay here if he is hunting you. I will protect you as long as I can, but he is planning something. I can feel it. Cotton nodded. Martha was right. Cross was becoming desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. That afternoon a stranger arrived at the boarding house asking for a room. He gave his name too quickly. He avoided eye contact. Cotton saw something familiar about him. A stiffness in his walk. A way of scanning the room. She realized he was looking for her. Cross had hired him. Cotton quietly slipped into the back hallway and found Martha. He is not a guest. Cross sent him. Martha's face tightened. I thought the doctor acted alone. This is worse than I feared. Cotton felt her pulse beating in her throat. For years she had blended into the background. Now hunters were appearing at the door. The stranger stayed for dinner, pretending to be tired from travel, but his eyes followed Cotton everywhere she moved. She recognized the type. Men paid to watch. Men paid to take. That night, Cotton made a decision. She could not hide anymore. If Cross wanted to understand what she was, then she would stop running from her own past. She would go to the place she feared most. The place that held the closest thing to answers. Savannah. The plantation ruins. The place where the indigo fields once grew. The place where her hair turned white at 15. The place where she first felt the strange cold inside her bones. The place where something called to her at night. If Cross was digging into her history, she would dig deeper than him. She would find out the truth before he did. She would learn why her body was different. Why she aged slowly. Why her hair had never changed. Cotton whispered to herself, if I know the truth, I can fight him. That night she packed a small bundle of clothes and hid it beneath the floorboard. She would leave before sunrise. But someone else had plans too. Just after midnight, as the boarding house slept and the storm clouds rolled back across the sky, Cotton heard a sound outside her door. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow. Measured. Waiting. Cotton froze. Cross had returned. And he was not alone. If you want, I can continue with part 6 in the same style. Here is part 6 of your 10-part historic horror story, written in simple, easy American English, 1,000 words, starting with an engaging hook, no dashes, and in a deeply atmospheric, interesting style. Part 6. Engaging hook. The truth was getting louder in the dark hallways and Caleb Craven knew it. Every night the secrets of the Chamberlain cotton mill whispered closer, like something terrible wanted him to hear its story before it stepped into the light. Caleb woke before sunrise, covered in cold sweat again. The same dream had returned and this time it felt heavier, clearer, almost like a memory he was not supposed to have. In the dream he stood in the old weaving room, surrounded by broken looms. A woman in a torn white dress appeared at the far end, her back turned to him. When she slowly looked over her shoulder, her face was pale as cloth and her eyes were hollow like empty spools. She whispered his name and then everything exploded into spinning thread and choking dust. This time when he woke up, the whisper of his name still floated in the air. At breakfast Caleb tried to act normal but Miss Lila could tell he was shaken. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, "The mill is waking up again. I can feel it. And you, child, are caught in its middle." Caleb swallowed hard. "What does it want with me?" Miss Lila did not answer right away. She stared toward the window where the first morning light touched the grass. Some places remember pain. They remember every scream, every injustice, every soul that was never given peace. When someone with a sensitive heart steps inside, the place reaches for them. Maybe to warn them, maybe to pull them in. Caleb did not know which option frightened him more. He stepped outside to clear his mind. The air was crisp and carried the scent of wet earth. Across the meadow, the broken windows of the mill flashed in the morning sun like watchful eyes. Caleb felt a pull again, soft but steady, almost like the building was calling him. He walked toward it without thinking. As he approached the main door, the wind shifted and carried a faint sound. At first Caleb thought it was the breeze moving through old wood, but soon he recognized it. A woman crying. The sound echoed through the open doorway and Caleb froze. His heart thudded against his ribs. The crying did not sound far away. It sounded like someone was trapped deep in the mill. He took a careful step forward. Inside, the air was colder. Dust floated in long beams of sunlight. The crying continued, thin and weak, drifting from the direction of the spinning room. Caleb followed it slowly, one hand on the wall to steady himself. As he walked deeper inside, the crying changed. It no longer sounded like a single voice. It sounded like many. Women weeping, children sobbing. The sound swelled and pressed against his ears. Caleb clapped his hands over them. "Stop," he whispered. "Please stop." And then suddenly the building became quiet. Every sound vanished at once. He lowered his hands and held his breath, waiting. A small sound cracked behind him. A footstep. Caleb turned so fast he almost fell. No one was there, but the spinning room door, which had been open when he walked in, was now slowly closing. Not pushed by wind, closing with purpose. Caleb took 2 steps back. His heart stabbed at his chest. The door slammed shut. Then came footsteps behind the door. Soft, slow, dragging footsteps. Someone or something was walking inside the spinning room. Caleb strained to hear, and then the sound of whispering rose, a tangled mix of voices speaking together. It sounded like thread being pulled tight around his neck. Caleb turned and ran. He sprinted across the floor as fast as he could, shoes slapping the boards, lungs burning. Behind him the whispering grew louder, as if it chased him through the hallway. By the time he burst out of the mill, he collapsed to his knees, panting, shaking violently. The door behind him stayed still, half open, as if nothing had ever happened. Miss Lila saw him from across the meadow and hurried over. She grabbed his arms and steadied him. "Child, what did you see?" Caleb could barely speak. Voices. Crying. Footsteps. "They know I'm there." Miss Lila pulled him close. "You must not go inside alone again. That place is not only haunted by the dead. It is haunted by the truth." Caleb's head snapped up. "What truth?" Miss Lila hesitated, then sighed deeply. "There were accidents in that mill. Many. Women who got caught in machines. Children who worked too long and collapsed from exhaustion. And there were things far worse. The Chamberlain family covered it all to protect themselves." Caleb felt cold all over. "People died there. Souls were trapped there," Miss Lila corrected softly. That night Caleb tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes he saw the pale woman from his dreams. Her hollow eyes, her torn dress, her hand reaching for him. He sat up and whispered, "What do you want from me?" Silence answered. Unable to rest, Caleb lit his lantern and sat near the window. The mill stood in shadow across the meadow. A strange fog curled around its foundation, moving like fingers along the ground. Then something shifted near one of the top windows. A shape, a human shape. Caleb leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. Someone was standing in the window of the old overseer's office. A woman, still and silent, her long white dress moved in the night breeze. Caleb's chest tightened. It was the woman from his dreams. She slowly raised her hand and pointed directly at him. Caleb stumbled backward, knocking his lantern to the floor. The light flickered wildly. He scrambled to his feet and looked back out the window. The woman was gone, but the fog around the mill grew thicker, rising like smoke. Caleb whispered, "What do you want me to see?" The room grew colder. A soft whisper drifted through the night air, too quiet to understand but filled with sadness and warning. Caleb pressed his hand to the window, feeling a deep pull inside his chest. Something in that mill was trying to speak through him. Something long buried. Something dangerous. The night stretched on, heavy and restless. Caleb knew he would not sleep again. The pale woman had pointed at him for a reason. And in the shadows of the Chamberlain cotton mill, a terrible truth was waiting to rise. Here is part 7 of your 10-part historic horror story, written in simple American English, about 1,000 words, starting with an engaging hook, no dashes, and in an atmospheric, interesting horror style. Part 7. Engaging hook. Caleb Craven never believed a building could breathe until he saw the Chamberlain cotton mill exhale a heavy white fog that seemed to crawl across the ground like a living thing. And in that fog he heard a woman whisper his name again and again, growing closer each time. The next morning Caleb felt as if the night had drained all the strength from his body. His eyes were heavy, his bones felt cold, and his thoughts were restless. He kept hearing the pale woman's voice in his mind, not speaking words, just calling him by name in a soft and broken way. When he walked into the kitchen, Miss Lila looked up from the stove and paused. "Child, you look like you saw the end of the world." Caleb sat down slowly. "Something is trying to tell me something. I think she wants me to follow her." Miss Lila turned off the stove and sat at the table. "She does not want you to follow her. Spirits trapped in pain only want one thing. They want someone to understand the truth they were never able to speak." Caleb swallowed. "Then why does she point at me?" "Because you are listening," Miss Lila said gently. "Most people ignore the dead. But you hear them." Caleb did not feel brave. He felt chosen in the worst way possible. After breakfast he stepped outside, hoping the sunlight would make him feel normal again. But even in the bright morning, the mill looked darker than before. The windows were like empty eyes glaring at him. The broken door hung open a little farther, almost inviting him. Caleb stood still, staring at the building, when something strange happened. He blinked once and suddenly he could see something in the second-floor hallway. A slow flash of movement. A long shadow slipping across the wall even though nothing else around it was moving. Caleb backed up instinctively. The shadow did not match any person. It was too thin, too stretched, too slow. The wind picked up and carried a faint soft cry toward him. It sounded like a woman sobbing. Caleb turned and ran toward Miss Lila's house. "She is still there," he whispered to himself. "She is still trapped." Miss Lila found him pacing outside the porch. "Tell me what you saw." Caleb took a breath. The pale woman. She was in the second-floor hallway. But not solid. Like a shadow. Miss Lila closed her eyes for a moment. "Then the time has come." "For what?" Caleb asked. "For you to hear her story," Miss Lila said quietly. That night Miss Lila brought out a wooden box from the back of her closet. It was old and dusty, tied with a faded ribbon. She placed it gently on the table. "This belonged to my mother," she said. "She worked in the Chamberlain mill before the war. She kept these because no one else dared to speak of them." Caleb leaned in. "What is inside?" "Names," Miss Lila whispered. "Stories. People who died in that mill. People forgotten by the Chamberlain family." Caleb opened the box carefully. Inside were yellowed papers, torn cloth pieces, and small personal items like buttons, hair ribbons, and bits of thread. Every item seemed to hum with sadness. Miss Lila lifted a folded paper. Her name was Anna Briggs. She was 17, pale skin, long dark hair. She worked the spinning frame on the second floor. Her dress was torn by a machine one day. They said she slipped. They said it was an accident. Caleb's heart pounded. "Anna, is she the one I keep seeing?" Miss Lila nodded. "The very same." Caleb felt a chill rush up his spine. This was no longer a mystery. This was a person reaching out from death. "What happened to her?" Caleb asked. Miss Lila's eyes grew heavy. "She was caught in the machine. The overseer refused to stop it because stopping production cost money. She screamed for help but no one came. My mother saw everything but she was too far away to reach her. They kept the machine running even as Anna's body was crushed. Later the Chamberlain family ordered everyone to stay quiet. They blamed Anna for her own death." Caleb closed his eyes tight. No wonder Anna cried. No wonder she pointed at him. She wanted the world to know what had happened to her. Miss Lila handed Caleb another paper. There were others. Children, women, men, every one of them silenced. Caleb felt anger boiling inside him. They suffered and no one listened. "That is why the mill is restless," Miss Lila said. "The truth was covered for too long. And now the spirits want someone to speak for them." Caleb stared at the lost items in the box. He could feel the weight of each story pressing on him. The pale woman had chosen him not because he was brave, but because he cared enough to listen. That night Caleb barely slept. Every time he drifted off he saw Anna Briggs standing in the hallway with her torn dress and hollow eyes. Sometimes she reached for him. Sometimes she pointed behind him toward something he could not see. Late into the night he finally fell into a deep dream. In the dream he stood inside the second floor of the mill. The machines were running even though no one was there. Cotton dust floated everywhere like snow. The room hummed with a deep mechanical growl. Anna appeared in front of him. This time she looked younger and clearer, not hollow. She opened her mouth and tried to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, her jaw trembled painfully and her eyes filled with desperation. Then she pointed to the far corner of the room. Caleb turned. A wooden panel in the wall was vibrating slightly as if something behind it was alive. Anna stepped closer and touched Caleb's arm. Her skin was ice cold. Caleb woke up gasping. His room was dark. The wind rattled the window lightly. The dream still clung to him. The wooden panel. Something was hidden behind that wall. Caleb sat up straight. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, before Miss Lila even woke up, Caleb grabbed his lantern and headed toward the mill. The fog from the night before still crouched low around the building. The broken door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder. But for the first time, the darkness did not scare him. It felt like Anna was walking with him, guiding him. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. The boards groaned under his feet. When he reached the spinning room, it felt as if the entire building held its breath. He walked to the far corner where the wooden panel stood. His hand trembled as he touched it. Behind the wall something shifted. Something hidden for decades. Something Anna wanted him to find. And as he pressed his ear to the wood, a single faint whisper leaked through. "Help me. If you want, I can continue with part 8 in the same style. Here is part 8 of your 10-part historic horror story, written in simple American English, around 1,000 words, starting with an engaging hook, no dashes, and crafted for an American YouTube audience. Part 8. Engaging hook. The moment Caleb touched the loose wooden panel, the whole second floor of the mill seemed to breathe in as if the walls themselves were preparing to speak. And when the whisper came again, soft and trembling, it was no longer a request. It was a warning. Caleb froze. His lantern's flame flickered as if something unseen had passed right in front of it. He pressed his hand against the cold wood. For a moment nothing happened. Then something tapped on the other side. One slow tap. Then another. Then a third. It was a pattern. A message. Caleb stepped back, his heart pounding so loudly that he could barely hear anything else. The wooden panel rattled again. Dust fell from the edges. Whatever was behind it wanted out. But he also felt something else. Someone watching him. He turned around slowly. The long room was empty. The old spinning machines sat silent, their belts hanging loose like long black vines. But something felt wrong. The shadows seemed thicker near the center of the room. They shifted slightly, even though no wind was blowing. Caleb swallowed hard. He lifted the lantern higher. "Anna," he whispered. "I am here. Show me what you want me to see." The room responded with silence at first. Then one of the belts on a machine swung gently as if pushed by an invisible hand. Caleb moved toward the wooden panel again. He slid his fingers under the loose edge and pulled. The panel resisted at first. Then with a sudden crack it came loose, dropping to the floor and sending dust swirling into the air. The space behind the wall was small and dark. Caleb held the lantern close and leaned in. His breath caught in his throat. Inside the hidden compartment were notebooks. At least 7 of them. Their covers were stained, torn, and faded, but they were still readable. Beside them lay scraps of cloth, a rusted ring of keys, and what looked like a broken overseer badge. Caleb reached in and lifted the top notebook. The handwriting on the first page was small and tight. Property of Anna Briggs. He nearly dropped it. She had kept records. She had written everything. The accidents. The injuries. The deaths. She had not been silent. She had tried to tell the world, but no one had listened. Suddenly the floorboards near the doorway creaked. Caleb spun around. Who was there? The lantern flickered violently. The faint sound of breathing filled the room. Slow, uneven, close. Caleb backed up toward the wall. "Anna, if you are here, I found your notebook." The air grew colder, much colder. Ice formed around the edge of the lantern's glass. Then she appeared. Anna Briggs stepped out of the darkness at the far end of the room. Her dress was torn just like the first night Caleb saw her. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow but fixed on him with purpose. She did not cry this time. She did not look lost. She looked determined. Caleb tightened his grip on the notebook. I will help you. I promise. Anna lifted her hand slowly and pointed to the floor beneath her feet. Caleb walked toward her cautiously. She faded out, but something remained where she had been standing. A loose floorboard. Caleb knelt and pried the board up. Inside the narrow space beneath the floor was a small tin box. He opened it with trembling hands. The contents made his stomach turn. Inside were tiny cloth scraps with names stitched onto them. Names of children, names of young workers, names of people who had vanished without explanation. Some names matched the items in Miss Lila's box. Others were new, dozens of them. This was Anna's second record. A secret one, a hidden one. Caleb felt anger rising in him. They covered up everything, he whispered. They lied about every death. Then the lantern went out. A heavy darkness swallowed the room. Caleb scrambled to relight it, but his hands shook too badly to strike the flint. A cold breath brushed the back of his neck. Then another. Then dozens of them. Caleb spun around blindly. Who was there? Soft voices filled the room. Not just Anna's voice. Many voices. Some whispered. Some cried. Some sounded like children. All of them were trapped. Caleb tried again to light the lantern. His fingers finally struck the spark and the flame burst back to life. He gasped. The room was full of shadows. Not normal shadows. Human-shaped shadows. They lined the walls. They moved slowly. Their forms were thin and twisted. Their eyes were empty. They were the lost workers. The forgotten dead. Caleb stumbled backward. I am trying to help you. Please, tell me what to do. The shadows trembled. A deep pressure filled the room like the air was collapsing inward. Anna materialized again at the front of the room. She stared at Caleb and lifted both hands, palms open. Her fingers curled slowly, shaping a signal. Come with me. The air shifted and Caleb felt himself being pulled toward the staircase. He followed Anna as she drifted down the steps. The shadows followed him in silent waves, filling the stairwell behind him. On the first floor she stopped. She pointed to a thick rope hanging from the ceiling near a broken beam. It looked normal at first, but then Caleb noticed the marks around it. Burn marks, blood stains, and something worse. A folded note stuck behind one of the beams. Caleb reached for it. The paper was stiff and brittle. He unfolded it carefully. It was a confession, written by someone named Elias Turner, supervisor of the mill. The confession was short but horrifying. Elias admitted to locking sick workers inside the lower rooms. He admitted to punishing those who slowed production. He admitted to ordering silence about deaths. He admitted to refusing to stop machines even when someone was trapped. He confessed that he had ignored Anna's screams. Caleb clenched the paper in his hand. His breath shook. This was proof. Real proof. Something that could finally expose the truth. The air grew freezing. Anna appeared again. She stepped beside Caleb, pointed to the confession, then pointed at herself, then pointed at the ceiling above. Caleb understood. She wanted her story told. She wanted freedom. But before Caleb could move, the shadows behind him began to twist violently. The floor groaned. The walls shook. A dark force, deeper and angrier than the others, rose from the far corner of the room. Caleb stumbled back. This spirit was not like the others. It was massive, twisted, something born from cruelty, not from pain. A spirit created by years of suffering inside the mill. It rushed toward Caleb. Anna stepped between him and the creature. Her form flickered wildly, struggling to hold it back. Caleb watched in terror as the dark spirit surged forward, swallowing the lantern light and filling the room with thick choking darkness. Anna turned her head toward Caleb. Run. If you want, I can continue with part 9 in the same style. Here is part 9 of your 10-part historic horror story, written in simple American English, around 1,000 words, starting with an engaging hook, with no dashes, crafted for an American YouTube audience. Part 9. Engaging hook. The darkness did not just fill the room. It felt alive. It crawled. It breathed. And as Caleb ran, he realized something terrifying. The thing chasing him was not trying to kill him. It was trying to stop him from telling the truth. Caleb sprinted across the first floor of the mill, clutching the confession so tightly that the paper began to crumple in his sweaty hand. Behind him the darkness moved like a living river. Heavy footsteps pounded the wooden floor although no physical feet were touching it. The building shook with every pulse of the creature's rage. Caleb reached the stairwell but the steps cracked as if something invisible were punching through them. He stumbled, nearly falling backward into the black wave that chased him. He grabbed the railing and launched himself up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Halfway up he felt a cold hand brush his ankle. He kicked wildly. A shadowy figure slid across the wall and melted back into the dark force below. Caleb reached the second floor and slammed the door behind him. It would not hold for long. Anna appeared beside him. Her form flickered like a candle in storm wind. She pointed toward the hallway that led to the office room where he had first spoken with Miss Lila. Caleb nodded and ran. The shadows on the second floor were quieter than downstairs but they were moving too, like smoke drifting against the grain of the air. They watched him. They followed. But they did not attack. They were waiting for something. Caleb reached the office and shut the door. He placed the lantern on the table and dropped into a chair, gasping for breath. Anna appeared across from him. Her expression was not angry or sad. It was desperate. Caleb spread the papers on the desk. Anna's notebook. The tin box of names. The confession written by Elias Turner. The evidence he was never supposed to find. He opened the notebook again and scanned the last entries Anna had written. Her handwriting was shaky as if she had written them while crying or injured. November 3rd. A child was taken by the gears today. Elias said to keep the machines running. No one stopped. The mother screamed for hours. No one went to her. November 8th. I saw Elias standing by the lower rooms. He locked a sick boy inside. He said weak workers attract sickness. I do not believe him. The boy cried until his voice broke. November 12th. There are footsteps in the walls at night. I think the dead stay here. I think they cannot leave. November 14th. I hear something worse now. A heavy breath. It follows me. I think the mill created something. The last page was stained with watermarks. Or maybe tears. Then the door behind Caleb rattled. The creature had followed him. Caleb froze. The door shook again. Splinters fell from the frame. A deep growl filled the hallway. It was not a human sound. It was something ancient made from pain and anger and long years of silence. Anna floated beside the door. She pressed her hands against it, trying to hold it closed. Her translucent arms strained. The wood creaked. Caleb looked around the office. There had to be something he could do. Something these spirits wanted. Something that could stop the darkness before it destroyed him. His eyes landed on the lantern. Fire. The spirits were tied to the mill. The darkness was created during years of cruelty. Maybe it was bound to the structure itself. Maybe the only way to end it was to destroy the place where the pain happened. Caleb grabbed the lantern and lifted it high. Anna, he said, breathing hard. If I burn the mill, will it free you? Anna turned her head slowly. Her eyes glowed with something close to hope. She nodded once. The darkness outside the door roared. The door frame buckled inwards. A huge shadowy arm pushed through, grasping at the air. Anna screamed without sound and threw herself against the break. The shadow recoiled but only for a moment. It came back stronger. Caleb lifted the lantern above the stacks of old papers. Then he hesitated. If he burned the mill he could destroy everything. The notebooks. The confession. The record of what had happened. Evidence that would prove the truth and free the spirits. But, if he failed to escape afterwards the truth would die with him. Anna drifted closer to him. She placed her hand on his. It felt cold at first. Then warm. Her expression said one thing. Trust me. Caleb nodded. He tipped the lantern. Flames spread across the papers instantly. The dry air of the old office fed the fire quickly. The notebooks curled. The confession blackened at the edges. Smoke billowed toward the ceiling. The darkness at the door screamed like a wounded animal. The shadows in the hallway shifted wildly in confusion. Anna began to flicker even more. Her form stretched thin like light going through a broken mirror. She reached toward Caleb urgently. He grabbed her hand. He could not feel a solid grip but he felt something pull him forward. The door exploded inward. The dark creature surged into the room like a tidal wave of shadow. It swallowed the desk. It swallowed the chairs. It reached for Caleb. Anna pulled him through the far wall. Caleb gasped as he passed through solid wood. He staggered into the next room and nearly fell. Fire was spreading behind them. Flames crawled along the floorboards like hungry snakes. Anna pointed toward the stairwell leading to the back exit of the mill. Caleb ran. He stumbled down the stairs. Sparks fell around him. Smoke made his eyes sting and water. He coughed and choked but kept moving. The darkness followed him, but now it was weaker. Firelight cut through its shape. Pieces of it fell away like burning cloth. The mill groaned. Beams cracked. The entire structure seemed to cry out in pain. Caleb reached the back door. He shoved it open and burst into the night air. Cold wind hit him like a slap. He ran across the field and collapsed on the ground, gasping. Behind him the mill burned like a giant lantern. Flames shot through the windows. Sparks rose into the sky like fireflies. And then he saw her. Anna. She stood in front of the mill. Still pale. Still glowing faintly. But her eyes were brighter. She looked younger. Lighter. Free. One by one the other spirits appeared behind her. Men. Women. Children. Their faces calm. Their forms no longer twisted by pain. As the roof collapsed, the dark creature screamed one final time, then vanished in a burst of smoke and sparks. The spirits began to rise. Not quickly, gently, like dust carried on a warm breeze. Anna looked at Caleb. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Then she turned into a soft light and drifted upward with the others until they vanished into the night sky. Caleb watched the mill burn until the flames died down and only smoke remained. He knew what he had to do next. Tell the world, tell the truth, and finish what Anna had started. If you want, I can write part 10, final part, in the same style. Here is part 10, final part of your 10-part historic horror story, written in easy, simple American English, around 1,000 words, starting with an engaging hook, no dashes, and ending with a YouTube call to action. Part 10, final part. Engaging hook. The fire was out, the mill was gone, and the spirits were free. But the true horror had only begun. Because now Caleb realized something chilling. The dead were gone, but the living still had power. And some people would do anything to keep the truth buried. Caleb spent the rest of the night sitting on the cold ground, watching the smoke rise from the ruins of the Chamberlain cotton mill. The sun did not rise for several more hours, but when it finally did, the new day felt strange and heavy, as if the air itself understood what had happened. He was alive. The spirits were gone. The darkness had been destroyed. But the truth was still inside his mind. And now he had to decide who would hear it. He walked home slowly. His clothes smelled like smoke. His throat hurt from breathing in the fire. His hands were scraped and bruised. But he kept walking. He needed time to think. When he reached his house, his mother covered her mouth in shock. She grabbed him tightly, checking for burns. He told her he was all right, just tired. She made him sit while she warmed water and cleaned the dirt from his face. Caleb tried to explain what had happened, but his voice kept cracking. His mother listened with wide eyes. She did not doubt him. She had grown up in Tennessee. She knew old stories. She knew what spirits could do. But when Caleb told her he wanted to speak to the sheriff and report everything, her expression changed. "You cannot go alone," she said. "And you cannot trust everyone. Some people in this town like that mill. They profited from it. You need to think carefully." Caleb knew she was right. The mill had been abandoned for years, but the families who had run it still held influence in Sumner County. Even though the Chamberlain family was long gone, their supporters remained. People who earned wealth off the suffering inside those walls. People who would not want their family history connected to ghosts and cruelty. Caleb spent the morning resting. By noon he walked toward town to speak with the Reverend who had always seemed kind and honest. Reverend Porter listened deeply as Caleb told the whole story. The confession, the spirits, Anna, the darkness, the fire. When Caleb finished, Reverend Porter did not look shocked. Instead, he bowed his head and folded his hands. "The Lord sees everything," he said. "Even the things men think they have hidden. What happened in that mill was wrong. The truth must be told." The Reverend offered to join Caleb when speaking to the sheriff. Together they walked to the town office. The sheriff was a stern middle-aged man named Clay Watson. He listened with a serious expression, his fingers tapping the desk slowly. When Caleb finished, Sheriff Watson rubbed his chin. So the fire was an accident caused by old lanterns and unstable floorboards. Caleb hesitated. The sheriff looked at him sharply. Son, think before you speak. You survived something dangerous. I believe that. But if you tell the county board this was supernatural or caused by spirits, they will not listen. They will not investigate. They will only call it childish fancy. So I ask again. The fire was an accident. Caleb understood the message behind the words. Sheriff Watson believed him. But the sheriff also knew the limits of the world they lived in. People did not want stories about ghosts in their county records. They wanted easy explanations. Clean words on paper. Caleb nodded slowly. Yes, sir. It was an accident. Good, the sheriff said. That will keep you safe. But you should keep your notebook and the papers you found. Do not lose them. They may matter one day. Caleb returned home feeling uncertain. The spirits were free, but the truth was still trapped. That night, he dreamed of Anna again. She was standing in the field behind the mill. Not sad, not frightened, calm. She pointed toward the horizon where the sky was slowly turning orange. A new day, a clean start. Caleb woke with an idea. The sheriff was right. The county would never record the real story. But that did not mean the story had to die. He gathered the remaining papers. Anna's notebook was damaged from the fire. Some pages were burned, some were gone, but the important pieces remained. Her writing, her fear, her courage. He read Elias Turner's confession over and over until he could almost hear his trembling voice. He copied every word into his own notebook. Then he wrote his own account of what he had seen. He described the darkness, the spirits, the fire, and Anna's final look of peace. He wrote for hours. When he finished, the story filled almost 50 full pages. Over the next weeks, life slowly returned to normal. People in town whispered about the fire. Some believed lightning struck the building. Others said careless children caused it. No one suspected what really happened. But sometimes when Caleb walked past the field where the mill once stood, he felt something gentle move through the air. Not cold, not frightening. A soft warm breeze that seemed to say thank you. Winter came. Spring passed. Years went by. Caleb grew older. He became a teacher. He traveled to Nashville and later to Kentucky. But he always kept Anna's notebook and his own writings carefully wrapped in cloth. By the time he turned 33, he felt ready. He rewrote the entire story in simple clear words so anyone could understand. Then he sent it to a small printing press in Nashville. He did not include his name. He did not include the names of the town or the mill. He called it The Lost Voices of the Mill. The first copy arrived by mail 2 months later. Caleb held it in his hands and felt something warm move through him, as if Anna stood behind him smiling. The truth was finally alive in the world. It would travel farther than the spirits ever could. He placed the book on his shelf next to her notebook. The two stories side by side. One written by a girl who tried to save others. One written by a boy who tried to save her memory. And sometimes at dusk Caleb would sit outside and look toward the horizon. When the wind moved softly, he felt sure he was not alone. Anna had not returned. She had no reason to. She was free, but her story lived on. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this historic horror series, make sure to subscribe, share, and comment to support more stories like this. Your engagement helps the channel grow and brings these forgotten tales back to life.